Welcome, age of vintage society. Often typecast as a menacing figure, Peter Lorre achieved Hollywood fame first as a featured player and later as a character actor, trademarking his screen performances with a delicately strung balance between good and evil. His portrayal of the child murderer in Fritz Lang's masterpiece M catapulted him to international fame. Lang said of Lorre, "He gave one of the best performances in film history, and certainly the best in his life." Was Peter Lorre silly or sinister? Make sure to watch the video until the end and leave your thoughts in the comments. If you are new here, join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Age of Vintage channel. Every once in a while an artist comes along that introduces us to a new perspective on the sexual awakening of a young and beautiful woman. Someone who delves deeply into the psyche and produces an explicit, erotic and even profound exposition on such a delicate and beautiful topic. Sadly, Peter Lorre didn't do any of that stuff. Often typecast as a menacing figure, Peter Lorre achieved Hollywood fame during the 1930s. To villainous parts he added a touch of dark humour, while he shaded comic roles with sinister overtones. Though he deprecated his art as face-making, Lorre took his work seriously and lamented Hollywood's use of his tricks, but not his talent. His globular eyes and diffident whine have inspired comic impersonations and been widely caricatured in commercials, cartoons and literature. Peter was a little character, and he knew exactly what he was doing when he was in a scene. So said stuntman Harvey Parry of the classic film actor Peter Lorre. Others who shared the screen with Lorre remarked on his effortless ability to perform in front of the camera, to create and develop a character before their eyes. They also told stories of his practical jokes on set and the way he dismissed his acting. It belied the seriousness with which he approached his craft. This attitude carried over to his view of actor autobiographies. A racket, he called it, one of his favourite words along with creep, vomitable and daddy-o. Lorre explained that his aversion to talking about himself stemmed from modesty, something his father had instilled in him. Not only was it indecent, but it required a certain lack of inhibition. Born Laszlo Lowenstein transformed himself from minor stage presence to Hollywood character actor through pivotal professional relationships and one breakthrough role. Portraying a child murderer in 1931's M, Lorre conveyed his unique blend of pathos and complexity so acutely that his career blossomed, with hits like 1935's Crime and Punishment, 1941's The Maltese Falcon and 1942's Casablanca, even as his personal life unravelled with drug addiction, romantic turmoil and personal insecurity. We peel back the layers of Lorre's life to reveal a fascinating, nuanced individual who struggled with intellectual issues in the midst of glamour and fame. As a parallel to Lorre's struggles with typecasting, the rise and fall of the studio star system giving a strong backdrop to the actor's professional as well as personal dramas. He didn't have a large part in Casablanca, but like his co-stars, it is the movie he's most associated with. He is the one who speaks from inside each one of us and makes us aware of the fact that we too have been torn out of any context and degraded merely by our being here in the first place. In this sense, Lorre always played the role of someone who was degraded, but someone about whom we can have only an inkling as to what that person might once have been. Born in Rosenberg in Austro-Hungary in 1904, Lorre grew up in Vienna, where he left school to work as a bank clerk by day and to act at night in a theatre company that combined improvisation with Freudian therapy. The manager, probably inspired by Struwwelpeter, the shock-headed hero of a popular 19th century children's book, gave him the name Peter Lorre. This was not inappropriate because at 5'3" and with unruly hair and a face that was a series of circles, infinitely expressive saucer-like eyes, a round face, a neck that would often disappear, he cut something less than a stellar figure. Fortunately, being Jewish then in that area of the world was considered advantageous if you ignored a lot of things and had an unconventional idea of what the word advantageous meant. He grew up and was educated in Vienna. To satisfy his father, he made odd jobs before starting his acting career. Lorre began his career at age 17 with a Viennese artist and puppeteer named Richard Teschner. Despite his father's disapproval, Lorre was drawn to the German-speaking stages of Breslau, Zurich, Vienna and finally Berlin, to which he moved at the age of 21. Sadly, his acting wasn't wooden enough to make puppeteering a career. Lorre's performances stood out due to his dynamic acting skills and the fact that he would only perform if accompanied by his favourite reindeer. It was on the stage in the German capital that Lorre drew the praise and attention of German playwright Bertolt Brecht. After years of relative obscurity, Lorre finally made it big with his masterful role as the psychopathic in Fritz Lang's first sound film in 1931. Lorre burst onto the world stage. It influenced dozens of later movies, yet it is unlike anything else. It is hard to think of many other mainstream films that are so radically decentered, so reluctant to grant us a hero. Yet it's an unexpectedly methodical, measured picture. The only dreaminess attaches, just off-centre, to the spaces where the killer himself moves. As the Germans rose to power, German Jews became more and more nervous. For Lorre in 1933, just like at the end of the fable, The Boy Who Cried Dung, the situation got very real very quickly. Peter Lorre left Berlin for Paris, talked to a couple of Parisians, then decided to keep going to London. Eventually he hooked up with Alfred Hitchcock. Peter Lorre had an irrational fear that the great director wouldn't cast him if he knew Lorre couldn't speak English, so Lorre faked it. He reacted to vocal inflections the way one would with a toddler or an egomaniac. The ploy worked, despite the fact that Hitchcock wasn't a toddler. Lorre arrived in America in 1934 expecting to shed his screen image as a villain. He wanted to grow as an actor. Instead of playing a child murderer in movies, he'd moved on to portraying people who killed adults. He even tried to lose his signature accent, but Hollywood repeatedly cast him as an outsider who hinted at things better left unknown. Seeking greater control over his career, Lorre established his own production company. His unofficial grey listing by the House Committee on Un-American Activities, however, left him with little work. He returned to Germany, where he co-authored, directed and starred in the film The Lost One in 1951. German audiences rejected Lorre's dark vision of their recent past, and the actor returned to America, wearily accepting roles that parodied his sinister movie personality. The first biography of this major actor, The Lost One, A Life of Peter Lorre, draws upon more than 300 interviews, including conversations with directors Fritz Lang, Alfred Hitchcock, Billy Wilder, John Huston, Frank Capra and Ruben Mamoulian, who speak candidly about Lorre, both the man and the actor. Lorre became good friends with several co-workers, including Humphrey Bogart, who headed an informal social organisation named the Holmby Hills Rat Pack, of which Lorre was a member. Per the Los Angeles Times, actor Vincent Price said Lorre was the most inventive actor I've ever known. He was a great scholar, an accomplished dramatic actor, and a masterful comedian. Elsewhere, director John Huston said of Lorre, he was so good as a menace that the movie moguls tended to waste him in horror films. He could do anything well, except play romantic leads. But Lorre, in a sense, never recovered from this great early success. This sinister role was to typecast him and thus to hinder his artistic development. It may have planted the seeds that destroyed him. Lorre's politics were of the fellow traveller variety. He was never a party member. Artists like Lorre were frequently asked not to join the party, the reason being that a party membership would have diminished their publicity value. Prompted by Hitler's ascent to power and an otherwise admirably high spot on the Gestapo's hit list. Hollywood was where glitzy film parts the finest actors from the stage, homogenises their language and style, and reduces their professional lives to a train of serial ingratiation with moguls and media. Lorre's role in M had made him eminently employable, so he signed as a contract player and began his long forced march through the ever-deepening mire of a studio system he came to detest. Lorre's first years in La La Land were spent among the refugee German-speaking intelligentsia, for many of whom exile was a personal disaster. Unable to master English, severed from their rich culture and denied employment, many illustrious refugees sank slowly to penury. His old mentor Brecht, driven across Europe by Hitler's expanding Reich, joined Lorre in 1941. Lorre, however, had a chameleon knack of giving people what they wanted, so he took to American life with all the gleeful desperation of a man reprieved from the gallows. He married 3 times, and each of his wives was cast as caretaker by an alcoholic and drug-addicted prima donna. Stars invariably functionalise the people around them: a driver, a cook, confidants, the current wife, and inevitably a mistress. It all resembled a small-time Borgia court around a swimming pool. The actor admitted to a dark side, and indeed traded on it, yet unquestionably the man inspired great devotion. His first wife, Celia Lovsky, a favourite of the Austrian wit Karl Kraus, gave up her own career for Lorre, and then after the break-up of their own marriage, she supervised his later marriages, befriending and caring for her successors, and later made of her own plush home a shrine to his memory. Lorre's domestic life was marred by serial philandering and a psyche so precarious that it required Celia's micromanagement. Incapable of saving money, he spent freely. His hectic, lavish life prompted one actor friend to remark, "The links of our chains are forged not of cruelties but of our luxuries." He was constantly in and out of rehab. It is sometimes irksome to behold Lorre's pampered poolside torment in the midst of Never Never Land, while tens of millions are dying from disease, starvation, and a German war machine he narrowly escaped. What most people don't know about Peter Lorre is that he dealt with drug addiction throughout his life. Peter Lorre was addicted to morphine. Yes, for decades. Yes, even during all his turns as a white guy pretending to be Asian. Yes. But his battle with drug addiction and his struggle with the choice between celebrity and intellectual respectability, separating the enigmatic person from the persona long associated with one of classic Hollywood's most recognizable faces. From Lorre's agonizingly long bout with morphine, he was under the influence of the narcotic for the overwhelming majority of the films he appeared in, including his 2 most famous, Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon. To his close friendship with defiant left-wing bohemian Bertolt Brecht, as well as anecdotes on his unbearable halitosis, which plagued him throughout the 1930s until 20th Century Fox paid to have his teeth fixed. The book is chock full of goodness. At the age of 21, Lorre's appendix burst, which caused chronic stomach pains that doctors treated with copious amounts of highly addictive morphine. From here, Lorre started abusing opiates, and his addiction has been blamed in part for all 3 of his marriages failing. Later in life, he totally became addicted to morphine. He was always in pain, either from his failing organ or withdrawal from drugs. He gained 100 pounds and couldn't find work later in life. He was also allegedly an enthusiastic philanderer, and for the penniless state he was in at the time of his death from a stroke in 1964. When Lorre died, he was living in a tiny Hollywood apartment. As reported by the Los Angeles Times, he was also a half-hour away from a scheduled divorce hearing with his estranged wife Anna Marie Stolt. Lorre sought expensive fast cures for his addiction throughout his life, to no avail. Movie studios would put out stories about how he would injure himself while filming the action-packed Mr. Moto movies. He made 8 between 1937 and 1939. But in reality the sanitarium visits were attempts to get off drugs. At one point during the filming of the movie All Through the Night, director Vincent Sherman asked Lorre, "How the hell did you make all those Mr. Motos?" Lorre replied, "I took dope." He managed to keep hidden from just about everyone until, during the Mr. Moto era, severe pain he'd dealt with for years led to a botched gallbladder surgery and was prescribed the drug, exacerbating his addiction struggle to an unmanageable degree and taking a toll on his health. It's just a tragic story. You can't help but fall in love with him a little even when he's playing psychopaths. He had the same draw Monroe did. If he's in a shot, you can't keep your eyes off him. If you watch his earlier films like Face Behind the Mask, It's easy to see how badly Hollywood blew it for him with the Moto films and the later parodies of himself. Lorre tried to return to the stage in the 50s and made his directional debut in Germany with The Lost One that bombed at the time, but due to his health and appearance issues, the only work he was offered from Hollywood were poking fun at his former typecast B horror films and TV shows. He was happy to be working and had taken on the attitude that if that was the Lorre people wanted, he wouldn't disappoint. But he was constantly depressed and felt he'd been wronged and forgotten by the studio system. His only daughter Catherine was nearly a victim of the Hillside Stranglers in 1977, but after hearing that she was the daughter of legendary character actor Peter Lorre, they let her go, a fact she learned years later when they were eventually apprehended. From M to Arsenic and Old Lace to his place in the history books as the first ever Bond villain, you can't help but want things to have gone well for Peter Lorre. In interviews he seems like a genuinely nice person. On film his talent is unmatched. It's a shame it couldn't have worked out easier for him, but at least now, like most great artists, he is getting the respect he deserves after his death. If you liked this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you are new here, and if you want to support my work, please visit my Patreon page. Now it is your turn. What do you think about the life and legacy of Peter Lorre? His deceptively mild manner and low-pitched voice made him one of motion picture's favourite villains.